everybody. Another one of our weekly privacy chats. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy Friday. Welcome to another one of our privacy chats. We were doing a regular tech policy and privacy book club, and I've gotten distracted by doing the chats instead of actually reading books and getting wonky with authors. But delighted today to have a book club and chat with Taylor Lorenz, who I'm delighted to talk to in virtual person for the first time, but have been a long time fan and follower of her writing. Our community probably knows Taylor from her Washington Post and her New York Times reporting. And if you don't, you're missing out, because really getting insight into the trends online, the culture online, the dynamic online. For me, having teens or kids in the house was like my way of looking over their shoulder and like, what are you really doing? But now that mine are away in college, I've got to stalk them on Be Real. And Taylor's writing has often been really interesting, engaging insight. Taylor is a columnist at the Washington Post, where she covers technology and online culture. She was a tech reporter at the New York Times business section before that, at The Atlantic, The Daily Beast, a visiting Nieman Fellow at Harvard, where she focused on Instagram and news consumption. A lot of our followers are really familiar with the Berkman Klein Center. Jay-Z was maybe Urs Gasser even there when you were there, and some of the other folks who do a lot of really thoughtful work. And I'm delighted to have her to talk about her book. But let me start with this. Taylor, I noticed that you kind of re-emerged on LinkedIn. You have a huge following and lots of engagement. You write and engage and are sometimes the focus of a lot of the discussion, even on Twitter and on Instagram and on TikTok. Us LinkedIn, geeks are kind of, business and corporate and legal and policy, not as much media, not as many academics, and people are, debating the nuances of European data protection law and, how to improve in your business and all that. What brings you back to LinkedIn? You are obviously growing the presence here, but you've got, millions elsewhere and are, so still a newer presence. What's your take? How is LinkedIn's environment from your perspective been different than the chaos of Twitter or Blue Sky or, the rest of the busy world?
Yeah, I'm still a small fish on LinkedIn. I think I got to like 5,000 followers recently, which I was very proud of. And then I saw people have millions. LinkedIn, you know what? I've been on LinkedIn obviously for a really long time. And I mention it in my book, but it's never generally been a place for like content creators in the way that I cover them. I've written about LinkedIn creators over the years. But I don't know. I've used it more as a utility. And then when they started to roll, and I also locked myself out of my account. And then when they started to roll out more of the creator stuff, I tweeted, oh, I need help getting into my account. I got back in and I was like, whoa, it's like you walk into a store you haven't been in a while and they've rearranged everything. I felt like that with LinkedIn. I was like, wait a minute, the past 3 years, like I feel like something popped off. So it's a great place. I mean, I've just been spending a little more time here. I think those policy wonky discussions are fun. So maybe I'll be hopping in more often.
And, there are a lot of people who would never speak up on Twitter. Maybe they're an employee at a big tech company, or maybe they're a data protection regulator. And, that conversation ends up being difficult or noisy. But yet here, someone will post the latest decision about the European Commission banning TikTok on devices, and you'll see all sorts of players in that ecosystem with thoughtful comments and policy statements and court cases. So it's, I think it's just a matter of different communities sort of self-sorting into different places. You had a story just this week, I think, at Rolling Stone. My kids always tell me that I'm cringy when I post, that I don't really know how to put the right post on Instagram, and that it's cringy when I comment on their post. It's like their father like saying something and it's cringy. But your take was that cringy is being used very differently nowadays, and maybe cringy is cool. Is Is that cringy to say? Cringy is still.
Yeah, I'm pro cringe here. Yeah, I work for the Washington Post, which is obviously where I write all of my reporting. But they've been really generous and let me do a couple freelance features that are a little bit more conceptual, and so that aren't necessarily news driven. So for the Rolling Stone Creators issue, I wrote this piece about cringe content and the resurgence of it. I feel like, you know, people are very pro cringe now, Jules. You'll be happy to know. There's been a bunch of viral TikToks about people sort of leaning into their cringiness as a way to generate engagement. I think right now what does really well online is authenticity and earnestness. It's just like people engage with it very well, especially on an app like TikTok. And so, and LinkedIn, frankly, I mean, I feel like a lot of LinkedIn posts can be cringy, but people are really earnestly looking to engage. And I think there's a deeper appreciation of that now. Whereas even 5 years ago, you know, people would sort of shame others for posting in a certain way. So, yeah, I just wrote about that transformation and also just the sort of cultural energy around earnestness and how, I feel like in 2017 to 2019, and there was this like deep nihilism on the internet. And I think more recently, as we've been, you know, things have opened back up in the world and stuff, people have just been out and there's been more different energy online. I don't know how to describe it. My piece gets into it in more detail.
I was in Bali not that long ago, and there's, you know, this beautiful scene, and it's beautiful, right? It's this temple, and there are these big sort of pillars, and it looks out into the sky. And someone did a sort of artificial picture where they put a mirror underneath, and it looks like a kind of a lane of water. And that became such a well-known Instagram picture that when you show up at this location now, there are hundreds of people waiting online, and the official picture that they take for you with your cell phone camera has a mirror under it because people want to look like that Instagram picture. It is the most beautiful, natural scenery. So on one hand, this whole completely cultured, artificial influencer thing has this incredible trend. And I guess on the other hand, we're seeing this backlash to it. So maybe Be Real, which we were talking about briefly before we went live, Be Real may not be as well known to folks, but it's been one of the most popular downloads, at least for a couple of months. It seems to be running out of steam a little bit. And the premise of Be Real is you got to take a picture right now, wherever you are. No posing. In fact, if you even like fix your picture and take a second picture, it shames you and it warns you. If you take a picture late, it says you took a picture late, and it penalizes you. And if you don't take a picture, you're blocked. So I'm on there to keep an eye on my 2 college age kids. And like, I like the fact that they're just posting a casual picture in their, you know, in their bedroom or whatever it is. But it's also a little concerning that kids, teens, it's a fairly young audience, are being told, take a picture. And it's not just a picture of you. It opens up both cameras. So it's maybe your friend who's sitting, dressed however they are across the room. So is Be Real sort of a reaction to that?
Yeah, I think what Be Real is born out of is the desire for simultaneous experiences online. You know, you saw things as well, like apps like Clubhouse, right? There's all these apps that kind of come up quickly in the past couple of years that have been about just simultaneous connection and kind of ephemeral spaces, whether that's a picture that, I mean, Be Real, you can see sort of your past pictures, but it's this like almost this ephemeral moment where people can connect and everyone is online together. And I think, yeah, that's just being expressed in a lot of products because it's a desire that users have, which is to connect in real time in a kind of a lightweight way.
At a time where we are becoming aware that loneliness at almost every age, you know, is a serious communal problem, is a mental health problem, seniors. And so interesting to think about the big pushback that's happening in legal and policy world now, where concern for what kids do online, what teens do online. We have age appropriate design codes in the UK, California. We have federal proposals that are only going to allow teens to engage in social media with parental approval. Not every kid has a parent available. Not every parent is in a position to do this. What you've had, we'll talk a little bit about, some of the focus you've had in documenting youth culture online in particular. what's sort of your take? Clearly, everybody wants to protect kids from predators, and everybody wants to protect kids from targeted advertising, and wants to protect kids from algorithms that are keeping them addicted all day, and maybe they're not doing well, and mental health issues that are evidently on the rise with young people. Is your sense that these new protections are going to solve the problem, or are they going to create more loneliness and disaffection? Or clearly we need to do something, but it seems like policymakers are grasping for challenging problems here.
I think that a lot of the new policies are horrifying, to be honest. I think, sure, some of them are well-intentioned, but I think that, I mean, I'm just a big believer in free expression and the right to privacy online. And I think some of the stuff like the Utah bill, where just parents have a huge, the ability to kind of see what their kids are doing at all times on the internet, that kind of, or on social media, that worries me. Although I totally understand as a parent that desire. I just think that you're setting kind of a dangerous precedent. And I don't think that those types of crackdowns are what cures loneliness at all. I think actually social media can be a fantastic way to cure loneliness. And when, you actually talk to kids, which I do all the time for my job, it's not social media that's making them feel lonely or disaffected at all. It's a lot bigger problems, and it has a lot more to do with their direct environment, their school environment, and I think we need to focus on schools and focus on building communities and serving kids' needs rather than, cracking down on their one outlet to connect with friends, which I think could just exacerbate this problem. I also just sort of reject the framing of like protect the kids, we're doing this in the interest of the kids. So many of these bills are not, the goal is not to protect the kids. The goal is for more control or for, political agendas and things. So I just think we need to be a little bit more thoughtful on this legislation. I'm not saying, every kid should be plugged into the internet 24/7. I think it's so important, for parents to set boundaries and for us to have scrutiny on these data privacy on these companies, but on tech companies, I think this focus on like, under 18, as you know, a 22-year-old is also extremely young, I think like as kids enter young adulthood, yes, they are subject to a lot with these tech companies that I think could be fixed. But anyway, I'd love to see more data privacy reform, more awareness about addiction to social media, and just more open conversations, and not just making this like save the children thing and ignoring all of our bigger problems. Adults get lonely too,
Tell us a bit about the book. Is the book deeper dives into some of the reporting? Is it original new reporting? Is it your perspective on a range of issues? Let's post a link to it, folks. And I do encourage people to pre-order. It's not out for a bit, but Teller can give us perhaps a little bit about what to expect. The book is titled Extremely Online, and
The Untold Story of Fame, Power, and Influence on the Internet.
So what should we expect?
Yeah. So, well, the book is about, it's reported nonfiction. So it's like my articles. I don't have a ton of, I have a perspective. I give my own perspective, of course, but it's not, it's more of a reported story of the first 20 years of social media. I think we've had all of this focus on the tech founders, and obviously we have 100 Facebook books, an Instagram book, Twitter book, but we don't focus on the users and sort of the social history of the internet. And so that's what my book tries to provide. If you, especially as it relates to what people call creator economy, influencer economy, influencers are essentially just power users of these platforms, and they've had a huge impact on the internet over the years. And my book really starts with bloggers, from the year 2000 to now. How have these power users shaped the products that we use every day, and shaped our notions of what it means to be online? And sort of like, you see all of this stuff you're mentioning earlier, like the Instagram photo thing or whatever, like there's all these ways that how influencers use these platforms basically trickles down to regular users. And so my book kind of documents that shift. it has everything from the first, content collab house in 2009 to the rise and fall of Vine to some FTC stuff. Maybe the regulatory people in here will appreciate. I wrote a lot about what happened in 2017 with the crackdown and the unintended consequences of that. So yeah, I think anyone that spends time online will be interested in this book because it's a sort of this picture of how we got here.
So how far back do you go? Are we talking MySpace and AOL days?
Oh, yeah, not AOL days, but definitely MySpace. I mean, again, it starts in the year 2000, basically, when blogs really started to take off. Unfortunately, Heather Armstrong passed away this week. She was an iconic mommy blogger. She's in my book. She was one of the first to ever monetize their personal brand online, to great backlash. I mean, it was insane. And that was almost 20 years ago in 2004. So it starts in the early 2000s with MySpace stars and big mommy bloggers that were really pioneers in this space. And it's so funny because I think right now, 20 years later, we're just beginning to grapple with the ethical discussions around privacy and like, parents oversharing about their kids online, and what right do child influencers have? They have zero legal protections. And yet this is a multi-billion-dollar essentially entertainment industry. So my book just basically says, hey, look, a lot of the stuff that's being discussed now, there's a rich history behind how this ecosystem emerged. And I hope people can read it and really understand how this stuff all came about so that we can have more nuanced discussions of where it should go.
Yeah, the sharing thing stuff is hard. I've certainly been guilty of it over the years. Who doesn't want to share pictures of their kids? And you used to share it, I don't know, by sending an email with some photos or a photo book attached. And now it's just easiest to do it with your network on whichever social you have. I do see people kind of blotting it. It's sort of a bit odd, right? Like you're sharing your child and you put a little starburst over their face, and it kind of looks like, something that would be on the National Enquirer or something. I mean, I think parents don't know what to do, right? We're telling them maybe there's something unsafe about it, but, somebody has a picture of a 3-year-old kid and, assuming they're hugging them or something like that, it's not a picture that's going to be reused for, pedophilia or so forth. But then they put a starburst over because they don't want to be sharing their kid's face but they're not sure why, right? They're not.
Well, yeah, I think they don't understand why. I think it's also, I wrote this piece a couple years ago for The Atlantic, where I interviewed dozens of children about the first time they Googled themselves. And, parents, all of this, like, the parents get all the bad rap for this, but who's sharing just as much information about kids is their sports teams, the school clubs, the schools themselves. I mean, so many classrooms have blogs, or they start an Instagram account, or they put kids' sports scores online with highly detailed personal information, like their birth date and address sometimes even. So I think there just needs to be a greater awareness about all of the data that can be put online, because I agree with you. It seems kind of weird to like post something over your kid's face, whatever. I think that's like an attempt to avoid facial recognition, which, as we know, is getting more and more sophisticated. But I think that just as somebody that's been doxxed and had every bit of my personal information exposed, it's definitely worrying, what people can do with that information in the wrong hands. And we know that more people, average people, especially teenagers, are going viral overnight, sometimes unintentionally. You never know where the sort of fire hose of internet attention is going to be pointed. And when it's pointed on you, you better hope, that your parents and school didn't spend 20 years putting out all your personal information, because it will immediately be used against you.
Yeah. The Europeans obviously have in their data protection law the right to delete. People call it the right to be forgotten, but it's probably more accurately the right to demand that Google or other search engines de-index you from the search directory. You may have rights to go to the publisher directly and argue that it's your personal information. The publisher might say, no, this is a media story and there's public interest in it, but at least you can get it de-indexed if Google, who ends up having to be the arbiter of whether or not your request is legit, or whether you actually are maybe some person running for government in Italy who's taking down information that might be,
Well,
important.
yeah, I just want to hop in for a second because you mentioned something that I think is a huge blind spot, especially for regulators, which is this notion of who's a public figure. Because I'm working on a story right now for the Post with my colleague Drew Harwell as well. But we're into sort of investigating some of this, just how behind the laws are on all this. But so many influencers are that have maybe 10,000, 20,000 followers. They have no legal recourse to the attacks they get against them because they're considered a public figure. And I think that, like, if you're basically gonna, there's just so many, it used to be like if you get a certain amount of press or you have a certain amount of attention, now there's endless websites. It's very easy to argue someone's a public figure, as far as I understand from talking to these women. And so I think we need to change our understanding of fame, which is what my book gets into as well.
Interesting. Well, so on that note, there are people like the woman fueling the rights outrage machine on TikTok, libs of TikTok. So I think you would suggest, given that you said, wait a second, this is somebody who we have significant public interest in knowing, like, what's behind this account with huge followers and lots of, evidence that the discourse was really threatening. So I guess it is complicated, though, right?
But that one was not complicated at all, because at that point she was going on Tucker Carlson anonymized. But I think if you're going to go on the most popular cable show in America and be out there giving interviews 24/7 to the right-wing media, and you've got millions of followers, that's a pretty open and shut case, especially too when Ron DeSantis's own press secretary is saying that, the content that you're posting is informing legislation. I think there was so many. I mean, I think we think really critically, especially at the Post. And I had a lot of conversations with my editors at the Post in doing that story and just saying, like, what is the bar? That's why I showed up at her house to try and get comment from her, because I think if you're going to talk about someone's identity, you really need to make every single effort to make sure that you have given them a chance to kind of express any concerns. Obviously, she was not very concerned about her privacy, because she tweeted a picture of me at her doorstep, which showed exactly the street she lived on and exactly the house that she lived in, which is insane. I mean, it's the type of information that we would never reveal in a story. So, but that was pretty open and shut just because she was so influential. I think it gets a little bit more dicey when you get to these smaller creators and things. I mean, stories happen every day where even I, as I've written for bigger and bigger publications, have made the decision to say, like, okay, this is kind of interesting in this certain niche community, but I don't know that it's worth covering and putting the spotlight on this individual. They seem to be more of a private citizen.
I guess it's also, we had a meeting just recently among a number of companies that have groups. And obviously, when you have content, if you're whether you're Snapchat or Facebook, and it's being posted publicly, we have some expectations that you live up to certain standards, and hate speech is going to come down, and the platforms maybe don't do enough, but, like, we get that that's not a private conversation. And we also get that when it's a one-to-one conversation, we don't want Google or Facebook, whoever, like, reading even nasty things we might be saying to one of another. Maybe they should worry about spam, and obviously they worry about child endangerment type information. But we have the right to kind of be coarse or boorish in our one-to-one. But then you start having groups at one extreme, tens of thousands of people in WhatsApp groups, and violence in the APAC region. But there are groups like the private Discord server recently that had national security information, 100, 500, 1,000. When does a reporter, right? I think when the platforms should jump in is a really complicated issue, and maybe it's just a certain number or some sort of metric. But when does a reporter? I've occasionally had a reporter, use a tweet, and I get it. I tweeted. That's today's press release, so I don't expect that they ask. But I'm a little bit of a public figure. I see someone else maybe who has a number of followers, but they're tweeting. It's public, but they don't necessarily. They think they're obscure, and then the next thing you know, it's gotten, picked up, and there have been obviously a number of examples of business executives. Or how do you think about that sort of framing? Do you ask first sometimes if you're?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It totally depends on the story and the nature of the post as well. Like, did that person post something highly newsworthy? If they put, like, then of course we're gonna, whether or not they're a private citizen, they just posted some hugely influential piece of information. We're gonna, try and reach out to them. But then again, yeah, I mean, we don't embed tweets anymore. I feel like that era in journalism is a little bit over, where, there was this period really from like 2010 to maybe 2018, 2019, when people were just, you'd see these articles that was just like tons of tweets embedded, and they hadn't talked to any of those people or investigated who they are. Sometimes you'll just see these anonymous tweets. And that was a big thing, especially in celebrity news. I think, at the Post, at least, and at the Times where I used to work, like, the bar is a lot higher because you're putting a lot of attention. So if you're going to embed someone's tweet or quote it, you kind of want to make sure that person is legit, you've talked to them, and yeah, that you're reaching out prior, which I generally do. Also, just because I want to know if somebody, I would want that same courtesy for me.
Let's take some of the comments and questions here. One of our friends flags this lack of third spaces for young people, limited physical space. Phones are the third space. I think you commented a bit about this, but I wonder if you want to.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I don't get into it too much in my book because that's a little bit off the realm, but I think that the lack of a third space is a huge problem. So many kids, I just think they don't have that environment, or they're not that sort of casual environment we used to have growing up as a millennial. The mall, which was this like sort of safe, controlled hangout space that teenagers could go. Obviously, we've seen those decimated, and I think there's just so many things about the changing nature of American life, and also thoughts around safety. I think I'm sure I always hear this from like boomers and Gen Xers, but like they were allowed to just like leave their house and roam and then come back later at night. And I think a lot of parents rightfully, have safety concerns these days, depending on where they live. And they're hesitant to give their kids too much autonomy. So yeah, I just think all of these problems are super, super complex. And I understand the desire to make the tech companies the villain. They are certainly the villain in many cases, but you cannot just age gate Instagram and think that that's going to fix everything.
So parents are too busy, too overwhelmed. I was head of integrity at AOL, and we used to try to think about our classic parent. And the way we thought about it is, you're coming out of a supermarket, you're pushing like a shopping cart, and you've got like maybe a kid who you're transferring into the car. And you've got groceries, and you need to look at an app for some reason, something beeps. So the notion, like maybe it's your kid who can't access a website because they're doing research at school or something, and the parent turns that off because they don't want
totally.
to be.
Right?
Yeah. So,
yeah. I'm not saying that it's all on parents. Like, I don't think it's like, hey, look, let's make it a free for all. And it's up to you, parents, because a lot of kids don't have great parents too. I hate to say it, like not every parent is going to be the type of responsive, caring parent that a child needs. But I think it's a push and pull. And I think that we have a collective responsibility. I would love to see, I know it's such a pipe dream, but any semblance of media literacy being taught to children. I think as a journalist, it's hugely frustrating to see the information ecosystem that children are marinating in and growing up in. They have no understanding of what is reporting versus what is a YouTube video that someone made, And so I think, I think there's a lot of really important stuff that we need to do on sort of a holistic societal level to prepare kids to use the internet responsibly, to not get sucked down rabbit holes, to have media literacy, and to socialize, better.
The researcher and I guess online culture expert Dana Boyd was offline for a bit. I think she was out maybe on her maternity leave, and so she was a little bit sort of disconnected from some of the day-to-day fro, and she's back and jumped in and said, oh my God, look at all of a sudden all these new proposed laws and this and that. She said, imagine this, we have seniors and they're spending a lot of time in front of TV screens and other screens, and some of them are getting more and more, extreme in their views as they maybe watch, Tucker Carlson all day or watch something on the left all day. We need to do something to protect our seniors from this sort of scourge. And, obviously you look at it and you're like, really? Like, that makes no sense. But it does seem to be the same attitude that we're bringing to it on the youth side. And the loneliness issue is probably, you focus, I think, more on youth culture than sort of the senior side of the equation. We are a rapidly aging population in the US, and we are a huge number of, individuals living alone. We know how much loneliness and those issues are directly correlated to health. The Surgeon General, I think, did an op-ed the other day warning about like the health risk to the senior population of this huge.
Yeah, certainly. It's so dangerous.
But we're designing our products primarily for the youngest generation. I still fumble with Snapchat, and I'm like, I don't consider myself super old time, and I work with tech all day, but I'm so used to like, everything else that I've been using. I'm still kind of like swiping the wrong way and accidentally opening up the camera when I just want to comment. And so I can imagine how, that next generation that didn't grow up with the same, digital day one lifestyle that the younger generation has. I don't know. Any thoughts on how we are ignoring that population who are going to be so dependent on technology for their well-being as they age?
Yeah, but again, it's like I think technology gets used as this scapegoat and this like reason for things. And I think I'm very much a tech optimist, and I think that we should build more tech products for seniors and ways, for people to connect with family members and stuff. Like, that's wonderful. But I think a lot of the problems that loneliness stems from are, increased hyper politicization of society, like the decline of social services. And as you mentioned previously, these third spaces and just the sense of community. We are living in this like super, super individualistic country where people won't even protect, their neighbor from COVID. So it's very hard to imagine a world where like suddenly the tech companies can come in and solve this problem. I think we need to have a better sense of community and more community spaces and organizations. I think it's just like one of those cultural and societal problems that's as much that sort of work and probably the work of politicians and community leaders as it is the tech companies. And I do hope they develop products. Unfortunately, they usually develop like the most dystopian products ever. When you talk about seniors, they're like, here's a robot that can give them therapy, and it's like, okay, that's great. But, it would be great to have more stuff that helps families connect and loved ones connect. And yeah.
How much does the book focus on sort of the TikTok world?
Definitely. Well, it does. I mean, the past several years, I think, have been completely dominated by TikTok. And I think as my book talks about, I think people really ignored Musical.ly, especially, there's all this controversy over ByteDance now, but it was like, where was this energy when Musical.ly was sold to ByteDance? Musical.ly was the most relevant, forward-thinking social app. I mean, it was just like a groundbreaking product that was completely ignored by adults, regulators, people in power, because the media, because it was used by teenagers and young women. And as my book shows, also time and time again, so often early technology is embraced first by teenagers and especially young girls, teenage girls, and those are the people that are likely to be most dismissed. Even now, when you say TikTok, people think, oh, it's like a teen dance app, right? When it's not. It's basically like a mobile-friendly YouTube. And so my book gets into that rise and also Musical.ly's rise and what sort of created the conditions for Musical.ly to succeed. Why did it succeed? Musical.ly embraced the content creator ecosystem in a way that previous platforms had not, specifically Facebook and Twitter. And so, they were just in such a huge competitive advantage for that reason. And then obviously when ByteDance bought them, it was like game over. So yeah, I don't get into the regulatory stuff very much because it's not as much my beat. But I think, from a creator standpoint, and when people say like, well, why is TikTok so, why can't we just have the short form video feature on Instagram? Such a misunderstanding of why people are drawn to TikTok and what that app offers. So I hope my book can kind of demystify some of that.
I remember as somebody who's regularly been guilty of sharing things, I used to have my daughter do Facebook Lives with me, and I would ask her for the audience, so what do you do online? What apps do you use? And I remember her saying, oh, I've been using Musical.ly. And I was like, what's that? What's that all about? And she must have been, 11 or 12 at the time. You wrote an interesting story recently about how AI is being used now in the dating app world. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I have another story coming out actually about an influencer that created an AI version of herself that will be your girlfriend for $1 a minute. You can chat with it on the phone. It's very crazy. Speaking of loneliness, so I wrote about dating apps and AI, and basically all of these sort of keyboard plug-in type apps that will scan your messages with somebody on a dating app or scan your profile and optimize it. So they'll give suggestions for your profile. They'll analyze your pictures, suggest and edit pictures for you. And then they'll also generate responses and prompts for conversations on dating apps. So I feel like, one huge barrier users of dating apps is just getting that conversation going or maintaining a conversation to the point that person will meet up with you in person. So yeah, it's a little dystopian. People were like, uh-oh, am I going to be chatting with a bot? I don't know. I mean, I do see Tinder and Hinge and these big apps, I could imagine them integrating some of this technology or purchasing these startups. I think proponents of it, especially the founder of Your Move AI, which is one of the main ones that I wrote about, was saying like he's always struggled with human communication, and he feels like AI is this assistive technology that can really help his personality shine rather than replace his personality, which I think is the fear. People say, oh, you're going to rely on an AI and then the person meets you in person and you're nothing like that. Well, we already are nothing. We're already someone different on text than we are in person. So I think a lot of those fears are a little overblown, but I do think there should absolutely be disclosure if you're chatting with an AI version of someone.
Yeah, there've been some proposals, although again, some of them are awkwardly drafted. I mean, obviously there is assistive technology where, we have voices for people who aren't able to verbalize today, and we'll have more sophisticated versions sort of that. And so to draw the line between, hey, this is an assistive technology versus, I don't know, today people touch up their photos. Maybe people, maybe the next feature for Zoom or LinkedIn will be something that makes my voice more commanding or masculine or, friendly, or I don't know, whatever it is people are going to want. I don't know. That's actually an interesting idea for a business. Make your voice. We all listen to our voices and we're like, oh, that's how we sound. Like we like to sound.
I know. Well, as a woman, it's so interesting. I mean, I understand Elizabeth Holmes doing that weird low voice because people do not like women's voices, especially if they're too high or they sound too feminine. And it would be kind of cool to be able to like alter that digitally somehow.
Let's take a final question, and then I'm going to remind people again that you can pre-order, and please do, because these things help the book get the kind of attention. This is going to get a lot of attention because if you are at all aware of the incredible stories Taylor's writing, and you've heard a sampling of them today, it's certainly going to catch the public interest. But help out by placing a pre-order, and you'll be excited when it shows up. Chris Paul says to us, what should the responsibility be of public and private sector organizations to educate minors and adults on how to use technology in a healthy manner? I'll say a little bit something and hand it over to Taylor. We do a lot of work in the school system, and everybody would like teachers and schools to educate a lot. This is clearly an important one, and there are, programs. But by the way, we lost a lot of math the last couple of years. We have limited number of hours in the day, and we don't have a ton of specialists. Taylor's not going to spend her days going into schools every day. I'm not. Teachers are struggling to keep up with the current technology. Like, can they get Zoom working and, deal with the fact that kids are writing their term papers on AI? So on one hand, of course, we need to, but I think we need to be careful about what we demand of schools, who in many parts of the country have hungry kids who are not concentrating well enough to like learn English. And now we're asking their teacher to help them understand. So maybe this is a bigger societal thing. Maybe it's schools. Maybe this is like where maybe we want national service. Right. It's the people coming out of college who might be the right bridge. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's hard. I do think that there's a role for schools. I wish that our public schools had better funding and infrastructure, because I know what teachers are up against. And I had a horrible time in public school myself, just trying to learn. It was very difficult. I have learning disabilities. And, it's very challenging for teachers to try and educate so many students at a time. But I think, as you mentioned, these are bigger societal problems. For instance, hundreds of thousands of kids lost a primary caregiver during the pandemic to COVID. That has a huge effect on loneliness, right? Like losing a primary caregiver, then being on Instagram, like there's these big societal problems that are affecting children that we seem to just want to completely ignore and focus on technology. And I think, again, it just goes back to like exactly what you mentioned earlier. Like, does that kid even have a lunch at school? Like, are they well fed to the point that they can even pay attention to what you're saying? What is their home situation like? Are both their parents forced to work 2 full-time jobs because of the economic situation that we're in right now? I just think these are above my pay grade, I should say, of like just bigger societal problems that I think our leaders and
Did we freeze here? Well, on my screen, Taylor has just frozen. I don't know if it's on my side or her side. So if we are streaming now, apologies for the technical snafu. Let's see if it clears up. I'll give it a second. She's frozen. Looks like it's on her side. Could be internet blipping. Okay, well, let me, Taylor's frozen, Jules is not frozen. Okay. Oh, I think we have her back. Let's just give it a second. Okay. I'm going to say thank you to Taylor. Please take a peek at her book. We've got a link to it in the comments, extremely online. Pull up some of her articles. Fascinating way, I think, on a lot of us who are on the law and policy side to figure out the solutions. Taylor's certainly been one of the reporters digging in and letting us have a look into what's happening in an internet culture. So thank you all for joining us, and happy Friday.